The first operations that we learn in math are addition and subtraction. So for the rest of our lives, we assume that addition and subtraction are the easiest operations. But that's not true when we're working with fractions. In fact, addition and subtraction are pretty much the hardest operation to do with fractions. I'll try to explain why at the end of this video, but first I'll remind you of the process for adding and subtracting fractions. In most cases, we won't be able to quickly add or subtract because we first need to get common denominators. You can't add 2/3 and 5/7 because thirds and sevenths are just completely different things. We need a number that is divisible by both 3 and 7. 21 is our magic number in this case. Now we'll multiply each fraction by the missing number on both the top and the bottom. On the left side, the 2 gets multiplied by 7 and the 3 gets multiplied by 7. On the right side, both the top and bottom get multiplied by the missing 3. This gets us two new fractions that have a common denominator of 21. Now we can add them easily by adding the tops and keeping the bottom as 21. Notice how getting common denominators involves multiplying fractions, which we know is the easiest thing to do with fractions. But why are we allowed to multiply by a seemingly random number? Won't that change the addition that we're trying to do? Well, look a little bit more closely at that multiplication. We're multiplying by 7 over 7 and 3 over 3. What is 7 over 7? It's 1. And we know from basic multiplication that multiplying by 1 doesn't really do anything. In other words, when we make common denominators, we're using the properties of the number 1 to help us out. It's like we're unreducing these fractions, changing how they look without changing their value. 14 over 21 is still equivalent to 2/3. It just looks different. Of course, if we start with common denominators, then we don't need to do any of this multiplication. If we have 2/3 minus 7/3, we can just subtract the tops right away to get negative 5/3. As promised, I want to quickly explain why addition and subtraction are so much harder when we have fractions. It really comes down to the order of operations, which I abbreviate as GERMDAS. The G stands for groupings, like when we have numbers in parentheses. But all the other letters can be paired up. Exponents and radicals, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. Remember that fractions are basically just division, so anything within that division box will be easy for us to do with fractions. That's why multiplication is so easy with fractions. Multiplication pairs really well with division. But addition and subtraction are in their own box, and moving between boxes is doable, but it usually requires an extra step or two. In the case of adding and subtracting fractions, the extra step is the common denominators. I know that the fraction rules can be hard to memorize, but I think that remembering GERMDAS helps. It lets us see how the operations pair up. It reminds us that multiplication and division are linked, but that addition and subtraction are off on their own, so adding and subtracting will take a little bit more effort when we have fractions.